everyone. Welcome back to Daily Easy English Talk. I'm Emma.
And I'm Jack. Thanks for joining us.
Let's dive into something we all run into. Those moments in conversation where you basically agree, but maybe not completely.
Right, where you need to kind of nod along, but also want to add your own perspective without, shutting the whole thing down.
Exactly. So today, this deep dive is all about equipping you with some really practical, ready-to-use phrases to handle those moments smoothly, politely.
Yeah, and having these phrases handy can make a huge difference. It helps keep interactions positive, even when you're not seeing eye to eye 100%. The goal is really to help you sound, well, thoughtful and respectful.
Okay, so let's unpack the first type. This is about acknowledging the other person's point first.
Precisely. It's about validation before you pivot. A really common and effective one is, I see your point, but...
I see your point, but... Simple. So you're basically saying, okay, I heard you, I get where you're coming from.
Exactly. It shows you're listening, which is crucial. Before you offer your different take, like you might say, I see your point about needing it done quickly, but I think we should also consider the budget.
Right. Acknowledges the urgency, then brings in the cost factor. Makes sense.
And building on that, sometimes you agree with part of what they said, just not the whole thing.
Ah, okay. So how do you phrase that?
Well, a good one here is, that's true, but... You're finding some common ground first. You latch onto something specific they said that you do agree with.
That's true, but... Got it. So you validate that specific piece.
Yeah. You affirm that bit, like, yes, that part is accurate, and then you introduce your differing idea or the extra bit. You might say, that's true, that report is important, but we still need more current data before deciding.
Okay, so you agree on the report's value, but flag the need for more info. Still collaborative.
Exactly. Now, sometimes you want to be even, maybe gentler. Perhaps you think they might be right, but you still have a reservation.
Yeah, like you're not totally sure yourself, but something feels off.
Right. For that softer approach, you could try. You're probably right, though.
Oh, I like that. You're probably right, though. It sounds less confrontational.
It really is. It signals a bit of humility, makes the other person less likely to get defensive. You're acknowledging their point might be valid before gently adding your own feeling or thought.
So, you're probably right that this is the best option, though I still feel a bit unsure about the timing. Something like that.
Perfect example. You've acknowledged their potential correctness, but still voiced your hesitation.
Okay, what about when you need to be a bit more direct about only agreeing partially? Like, it's clear you're not fully on board.
There's a phrase for that, too. It clearly signals the limit of your agreement. I agree to an extent, but...
I agree to an extent, but... Okay, that's pretty clear. Sets the boundary.
It does. It says, look, we align on some things here, but not everything. Useful in, say, more formal settings, maybe. You could say, I agree to an extent with that strategy, but I think we could take a different approach with the marketing side.
Clear, explicit, partial agreement, then your alternative. Okay.
And finally, there's a really useful kind of neutral option. It doesn't even use but. It just sort of opens the door to other views.
Ooh. What's that?
Simply. That's one way to look at it.
Ah. That's one way to look at it. It's polite, doesn't directly disagree.
Exactly. It validates their view as a perspective without you having to actually agree with the content.
Yeah.
And crucially, it implies there might be other ways to look at it.
So you could follow up with...
You could say, that's one way to look at it. Another way might be to wait and see what happens next month. It just gently introduces an alternative possibility.
I see. So using phrases like these, it feels really different from just saying, no, you're wrong, or I disagree.
Absolutely. It's less about opposition and more about collaboration and respect. You're trying to build on the conversation, not shut it down. Fosters an environment where different ideas can actually be explored together.
So wrapping this up, having a few of these go-to phrases ready really can make navigating those moments of, let's call it partial agreement, much easier and feel more natural, right?
Definitely. It gives you practical tools to voice your perspective thoughtfully while still respecting the other person. It adds a bit of finesse to your conversational skills.
Makes those tricky conversations potentially less tricky.
For sure. And maybe here's something for you, the listener, to mull over. Think about your conversations just today or yesterday. How often do opportunities pop up where you agree, but only partly?
Yeah, good question.
And consider what impact using just one of these phrases like, I see your point, but, or that's one way to look at it, might have had on how that interaction felt, or even how it turned out.
So just to quickly run through them again. I see your point, but acknowledges their reasoning. That's true, but confirms a specific fact or truth they stated. You're probably right, though, concedes a likelihood, adds reservation. I agree to an extent, but explicitly states partial, limited agreement. That's one way to look at it. Validates their view as a perspective, allows for others.
And a great set of tools, offering different levels of agreement or acknowledgement. Choosing the right one really depends on the specifics, doesn't it?
Yeah,
What exactly did they say? What part can you genuinely connect with?
absolutely. And seeing them used in context, like in little role plays, really helps bring them to life.
Yeah, let's try that. Imagine a team discussion. Someone says, let's launch the product early to beat our competitors. We already touched on this.
Right. So instead of, no, that's too risky, you could say,
I see your point about wanting to get ahead of the competition. That makes strategic sense. But I'm worried we risk releasing something that isn't quite ready and that could backfire.
perfect. You acknowledge the strategic point, see your point, before introducing the risk, but it keeps the discussion about balancing strategy and risk rather than just yes-no on launching early.
Okay, how about a casual chat? Friend says, working through lunch is the only way I can get everything done.
Oh, common one. Instead of, that's terrible for you, maybe.
That's true, that it feels like you get more done sometimes, but won't we actually be more productive this afternoon if we take a quick break and eat something?
Nice use of, that's true, but you validate their immediate feeling or observation. Feels like you get more done, but then introduce the counter-argument about longer-term productivity and well-being. But won't we be more productive?
Yeah, it validates the immediate truth as true, while gently questioning the overall wisdom of the habit.
Okay, another scenario, predicting something. Maybe someone says, I bet it's going to rain all weekend.
And you check the forecast and it looks okay, but forecast can be wrong. So instead of, no, the forecast is fine, maybe.
You're probably right that we might get some showers. The weather has been unpredictable. The forecast I saw earlier looked mostly clear for Saturday, at least.
Yeah, you're probably right, though. Works well there. You concede the possibility. Probably right, might get some showers. Acknowledging the general unpredictability, but then gently introduce your specific information, though the forecast I saw, as a counterpoint. It's less argumentative.
Right. How about discussing, say, a new company policy? Someone says, this new policy is fantastic. It solves all our problems.
Okay, maybe you think it has some good points, but solves all our problems feels like an overstatement. So no, it doesn't, but
Well, I agree to an extent it definitely addresses issue X, which is great, but I'm not sure it fully tackles issue Y, and we might need a follow-up plan for that.
that's a good one. I agree to an extent, but you pinpoint the specific part you agree with, addresses issue X, which validates their positive view partially, but then you clearly state the limitation or the remaining problem. Doesn't fully tackle issue Y. Precise.
And finally, a really subjective opinion. Someone says, modern art is just meaningless scribbles.
Ooh, controversial. Instead of launching into a defense of modern art, maybe.
Well, that's one way to look at it. It can definitely be challenging to understand sometimes. But I find if you look at the context or the artist's intention, sometimes you see interesting ideas in there.
That's one way to look at it. Perfect. You acknowledge their perspective exists, one way to look at it, and even validate the feeling behind it can be challenging. Then you offer your different perspective, but I find, as just another way to engage with it, not as the right way. Very diplomatic.
Going through these examples, you really feel how these phrases can de-escalate potential conflict and keep the conversation constructive. They're not just about being nice, they're about being effective communicators.
Absolutely. They stop that knee-jerk defensive reaction people often have when they feel directly contradicted. You're adding to the conversation, not just opposing it.
And it comes back to showing respect. Showing you've actually listened and engaged with their idea before offering your own, that builds trust and goodwill.
It's about reflecting the complexity of things, isn't it? Most situations aren't simple. Our language needs tools to handle that complexity, and these phrases provide exactly that. They let us navigate that gray area between full agreement and full disagreement.
That ability to find some common ground, or at least acknowledge the other person's viewpoint first, it really is a cornerstone of good communication, especially when opinions differ.
So for you listening, the takeaway here is that you've got this incredibly useful set of tools, these 5 phrases. I see your point, but, oh, wait, that's true, but, you're probably right, though. I agree to an extent, but, and that's one way to look at it. They're practical, and you can start using them right away.
They give you options beyond just saying, yes or no, I agree or I disagree. They help you engage more thoughtfully, more respectfully.
Maybe try paying attention in your conversations over the next few days. When you hear something you don't fully agree with, pause for a second. Think. Which of these phrases might fit here? What specific part of what they said could I acknowledge first?
And don't worry about getting it perfect instantly. Just trying to use them, making that effort to connect before you diverge, often makes a big difference in how the conversation feels. Practice makes it more natural over time.
And here's a final thought to chew on as we wrap up. Think about this. How does consciously looking for something to acknowledge, actively searching for the point you can see, the part that's true, the aspect you agree with to an extent, or the view that's one way to look at it? How does that change the way you actually listen?
Does it shift your focus? Instead of just prepping your rebuttal while they're still talking, are you actually processing their words differently, looking for that point of connection first, even if you know you'll add a different perspective later?
How might starting your response with that little bit of acknowledgement, finding that initial sliver of common ground or understanding, change the whole feel of a potential disagreement? Does it turn a potential argument into more of a collaborative exploration?
It's a small shift in approach, but it can have a really big impact on how your ideas land and how your relationships develop.
Definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into smoothing out those conversational bumps.
Yeah, keep listening, keep thinking, and keep experimenting with these ways to connect and communicate more effectively. We hope this deep dive gave you some useful tools for your English conversations.
And join us next time. We're going to tackle another common situation.
So make sure you follow or subscribe so you don't miss it, and maybe share the show with any friends who are also learning English.
Yeah, definitely do that.
Thanks so much for listening today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Catch you next time.
Bye for now. And remember to subscribe to Daily Easy English Talk.